ChosenOne, pause for a moment and pay close attention. What you are sensing right now is not random, emotional, or imagined. Something has shifted in the spiritual realm concerning your name. Heaven has moved on your behalf, and that movement is already producing effects in the natural, even if you haven't fully seen them yet. The reason this message feels weighty, the reason it's stirring something deep within you, is because it is confirming what your spirit has known all along. The season of confusion, silence, and unanswered questions is coming to an end. God is stepping forward as your defender, and what he is about to do will bring clarity to everything that never made sense. For a long time you've wondered why people seem to be watching you, why conversations changed when you left the room, and why accusations spoken or unspoken seem to follow you, no matter how carefully you lived. You questioned why doors closed without explanation, why opportunities stalled at the last minute, and why your integrity seemed to cost you instead of reward you. At times it felt like you were on trial without knowing the charges. But hear this clearly, none of it was wasted and none of it was unseen. The scrutiny you endured was not meant to destroy you. It was permitted to prepare the stage for a vindication that will be undeniable. The season of silence is ending. What was once hidden is coming into the light, not to expose you in shame but to reveal you in truth. The vindication you have been praying for is not approaching from a distance. It is already in motion. However, before it manifests fully, there is something vital you must understand. This moment is not about revenge. It is not about proving others wrong or watching enemies fall. This is about revelation, God revealing who he is through how he defends you, and revealing who you are through what withstands the test. By the end of this message, you will understand why God allowed the scrutiny, why certain people were permitted to examine your life so closely, and why heaven is now preparing to expose the truth in a way that will silence every voice that rose against you. You're about to see vindication not as a single event, but as a divine process with purpose. There are dimensions to this vindication that most believers never access, and one of them will turn your story into a weapon that strengthens others. Stay present. Stay open. What God is doing now is bigger than clearing your name. It is establishing his justice through your life. You need to understand something deeply, because this is where clarity begins to replace confusion and peace starts to overtake the anxiety you've been carrying. The attack you've been under was never random. It wasn't bad luck, jealousy alone, or people simply misunderstanding you. What you experienced was an investigation, one that unfolded both in the natural and in the spiritual. And while it felt invasive, uncomfortable, and at times unfair, it was never designed to destroy you. It was permitted to define you. There were moments when you sensed it without anyone saying a word. A shift in tone, a change in access, the subtle withdrawal of trust from places that once felt safe. You noticed how eyes lingered longer, how questions carried hidden motives, how silence itself felt heavy with judgment. You may have brushed it off at first, telling yourself you were overthinking, but deep down you knew something was happening. You were being measured, not only by people but by forces that wanted to determine whether what God placed on your life was real or fragile. This is why doors didn't open when they should have. This is why applications stalled, promotions evaporated, and opportunities disappeared without explanation. You watched others advance with less integrity, less preparation, and less depth, while you remained in the waiting room wondering what you were missing. It felt like the standard for you was higher, stricter, almost unfair. But that wasn't punishment. That was examination. Heaven was allowing scrutiny because what rested on your life cannot be sustained by shortcuts. What you thought was resistance was actually exposure, but not the kind you feared. You assumed they were searching for flaws, for evidence that the accusations were justified. And yes, they were looking. People examined your words, your patterns, your past, your reactions under pressure. Some wanted to confirm their suspicions. Others hoped to find a reason to disqualify you so they wouldn't have to confront the truth about themselves. But what they didn't know was that while human eyes were scanning for failure, divine eyes were recording faithfulness. You weren't paranoid, you were perceptive. That feeling of being watched, of being evaluated against a standard you couldn't see, was real. But here is the turning point you need to let settle into your spirit. They did not find what they were looking for. Let that truth sit with you for a moment. The investigation did not uncover darkness. It uncovered discipline. It didn't expose hypocrisy. It revealed consistency. Every attempt to uncover compromise only highlighted your commitment. When they expected secrecy, they encountered prayer. When they anticipated weakness, they found endurance. When they hoped for a reaction, they observed restraint. When they thought pressure would make you fold, it refined you instead. The enemy miscalculated because he assumed the isolation would break you. What he didn't account for was what happens to a person who learns to meet God in the secret place when no one else is watching. Every morning you chose faith over fatigue mattered. Every time you held your tongue when defending yourself would have been justified mattered. Every moment you chose integrity when compromise offered relief mattered. Heaven was documenting what people dismissed. Your tears weren't wasted. Your obedience wasn't invisible. Your quiet perseverance wasn't overlooked. In the courts of heaven, evidence was being gathered, not for prosecution but for defense. This is why the accusations didn't stick the way they were meant to. This is why rumors lost momentum. This is why narratives kept collapsing under their own weight. Truth has a way of standing when lies run out of energy. And what you're beginning to experience now is the early tremor of that shift. What was meant to expose you is preparing to exalt you. What was designed to shame you is about to shine light on who you truly are. This isn't motivation. This is alignment with what has already been declared. Scripture reveals this pattern clearly, even when our emotions resist it. When Psalm 37 declares, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. He will make your righteous vindication shine like the dawn, your justice like the noonday sun." It is not poetic exaggeration. It is a legal promise. Dawn cannot be hidden. Noon cannot be denied. Vindication, when authored by God, does not arrive quietly, it arrives visibly. And here is where understanding becomes critical, because many people lose the very vindication they've been praying for by misunderstanding its nature. Vindication is not God agreeing with your desire for revenge. It is God revealing the truth without your interference. There is a vast difference between defending yourself and entrusting yourself. One keeps you entangled, the other positions you for divine justice. This is why forgiveness is not optional in this process. You cannot walk in true vindication while secretly rehearsing what you'll say when the truth comes out. You cannot expect God to clear your name while you are plotting how to clear your own. Romans reminds us plainly that vengeance belongs to the Lord, not because He is cruel, but because He is accurate. Human retaliation distorts justice. Divine vindication establishes it. Be honest with yourself here, because this question determines whether vindication becomes your breakthrough or your stumbling block. Have you been trying to manage the narrative? Replaying conversations in your head? Drafting explanations no one asked for? Losing sleep over opinions that were never yours to carry? All the while, God was silent, not absent, but intentional. Silence is not neglect when God is building a case. It is strategy. Jesus Himself modeled this order. When insulted, He did not retaliate. When accused, He did not threaten. When misunderstood, He entrusted Himself to the one who judges justly. That sequence matters: first the entrusting, then the vindication. First the character, then the clearing. God does not rush to defend what has not been refined. But when refinement is complete, defense becomes inevitable. This is why the investigation lasted longer than you expected. It wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. Heaven wasn't looking for flawlessness. It was looking for consistency. Integrity does not mean you never struggled. It means you refuse to live divided. And now that your character has been established in places no one applauded, your vindication is becoming undeniable. Proverbs reminds us that the integrity of the upright guides them. Integrity is a compass. It leads you when applause is absent and reward is delayed. And when integrity leads, vindication follows. You cannot be vindicated from accusations that are true. That is why God in His mercy allows exposure before elevation. Not to humiliate you, but to heal you. Not to shame you, but to strengthen you. This is the divine audit that took place. Not a witch hunt, but a purification. Not a trap, but a preparation. And if there were areas where your private life didn't match your public declaration, God gave you time to address them quietly. Because he protects his children from public embarrassment by inviting private correction. When you responded with humility instead of defensiveness, you aligned yourself with heaven's process. Psalm 24 asks, "Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord?" And the answer is clear: those with clean hands and a pure heart. Clean hands speak of actions. A pure heart speaks of motives. Vindication flows through vessels that are clean, not because God is harsh, but because he is holy. And holiness is not restriction, it is protection. Here's what happens next, and this is where the shift becomes visible. People will not only realize that the accusations were false, they will recognize that your character was solid all along. They won't just see that you were right, they will see that you are righteous. And that distinction changes everything. Facts may silence critics, but character commands respect. This is why God waited. This is why he didn't let you speak too soon. This is why he restrained you when you wanted to explain yourself. Because when vindication comes from him, it doesn't require defense. It stands on its own. And when your righteousness shines like the dawn, even those who doubted you will have to acknowledge that something greater was at work. You didn't survive the investigation by accident. You passed it by obedience. And now the same scrutiny that once felt threatening is becoming the foundation of your credibility. What tried to disqualify you is about to qualify you. What tried to silence you is about to amplify you. This is the vindication of character, and it is the first door that had to open before anything else could follow. As your character was being established in private, something else was unfolding simultaneously, something far larger than personal reputation or momentary misunderstanding. What many never realize is that once integrity has been proven, heaven begins to address assignment. This is where the pressure intensified, where the resistance felt disproportionate, and where the battle seemed to move beyond people into something heavier, more persistent, and more strategic. That escalation was not accidental. It was the signal that your calling itself was now under scrutiny. You need to see this clearly because misunderstanding this phase causes many to internalize attacks that were never personal. The reason the enemy fought you so hard was never because of who you are alone, but because of what you carry. Callings attract conflict before they attract crowds. Assignments draw opposition long before they draw affirmation. And when your calling carries influence, the first line of attack is almost always your credibility. If the enemy can damage your name, he believes he can delay your impact. This is why the attacks felt targeted, why the resistance seemed intentional, why it wasn't just one setback, but a pattern. The enemy understood something you may not have fully seen yet. If your voice is trusted, your influence multiplies. If your integrity is intact, your authority expands. And if your calling is activated at the right time, it threatens systems built on compromise, fear, and deception. So the strategy wasn't merely to discourage you, it was to disqualify you in the eyes of others. But here is the divine reversal that changes everything. Every attempt to undermine your calling was actually refining it. Every delay was building capacity. Every rejection was strengthening discernment. The enemy assumed resistance would exhaust you. Instead, it matured you. He assumed isolation would shrink you. Instead, it clarified you. What was meant to weaken your confidence ended up deepening your dependence on God, and that dependence is what gives a calling its weight. Scripture reveals this pattern without ambiguity. When Isaiah declares that no weapon formed against you will prosper, it does not suggest that weapons won't be formed. It acknowledges they will be. The promise is not the absence of opposition, but the failure of its outcome. And then it goes further, stating that every tongue that rises against you in judgment will be refuted, not by your arguments, not by your explanations, but by truth being established through fruit. Notice the sequence. First the weapon fails, then the accusation collapses. This is not defensive posture, this is authoritative positioning. Vindication of calling does not look like you standing on a platform correcting narratives. It looks like God opening doors no one can close and closing mouths no one can reopen. It looks like favor restoring what rejection tried to bury. It looks like alignment overtaking resistance. This is why suddenly conversations begin to shift. People who once avoided you now seek your input. Those who dismissed you begin to reference your work. Opportunities that went silent resurface with new urgency. Invitations appear that you didn't chase. This is not coincidence. This is heaven validating what hell tried to invalidate. When God vindicates a calling, he does not do it quietly because callings are not meant to remain hidden. But here is where many stumble, and this is why understanding this moment matters so deeply. Vindication of calling is not permission to return bitter. Elevation does not excuse resentment. Restoration is not an opportunity to relive offense. If bitterness survives the waiting season, it will poison the harvest. This is why God delayed some doors, not because you weren't ready and still, but because your heart needed time to release what would have corrupted authority. You must understand that authority flows from alignment, not anger. Influence is sustained by humility, not vindication alone. When God restores what was denied, he is not endorsing an "I told you so" posture. He is inviting you into stewardship. The calling being vindicated now is larger than personal fulfillment. It is tied to responsibility, and responsibility requires maturity. This is why the process felt so stretching. God was not only preparing your platform, he was preparing your posture. Because when he vindicates your calling publicly, people will watch not only what you do, but how you do it. They will look for consistency between message and method, between authority and compassion. And the credibility you now carry was forged in the unseen moments when no one defended you but God. Think about it. If God had elevated you before this season, the accusations would have followed you upward. The questions would have lingered. The doubts would have been louder. Instead, God allowed the pressure to resolve before the promotion. He cleared the foundation before expanding the structure. And now, when your calling begins to operate at a higher level, it does so with stability, not fragility. This is the divine plot twist the enemy never anticipates. What he uses to delay you becomes the very evidence God uses to advance you. Every false accusation becomes proof of endurance. Every unjust rejection becomes confirmation of resilience. Every season of obscurity becomes credibility when influence arrives. The calling that survives scrutiny emerges with authority that cannot be manufactured. But you must hear this warning with clarity and grace. You cannot step into a vindicated calling while carrying unresolved offense. God will not anoint revenge. He will not empower bitterness. He will not sustain influence rooted in resentment. Vindication is not the reward for endurance, it is the responsibility that follows it. And responsibility demands a heart that reflects the character of the one who called you. This is why forgiveness is not weakness, it is alignment. Forgiveness keeps your calling clean. It keeps your motives pure. It ensures that when doors reopen, you walk through them with wisdom instead of wounds. You are not returning to spaces to prove anything. You are stepping into assignments to reveal something, namely that God is faithful and his justice is precise. And here is where acceleration happens. When God vindicates a calling, he often restores it with increase. What was delayed returns with expansion. What was denied returns with depth. What was restricted returns with greater reach. This is why the opportunities coming now may feel larger than what you initially asked for. God does not merely replace what was lost, he redeems it. However, redemption requires readiness. Capacity must match calling. Systems must support stewardship. Character must anchor influence. This is why preparation matters now more than ever. Get your house in order not out of fear but out of honor. Update what you neglected during the waiting season. Strengthen what weakened under pressure. Rebuild with wisdom what you once tried to build with urgency. You're not late. You're aligned. The calling was never cancelled, it was curated, and the delay was not denial, it was development. Now, as vindication unfolds, you will notice that it comes without the need for explanation. People will see the fruit and adjust their conclusions accordingly. Truth will speak louder than defense ever could. Let this settle into your spirit. Heaven is not campaigning for you because you demanded it. Heaven is endorsing you because you endured with integrity. And when God endorses a calling, opposition loses leverage. Not because everyone suddenly agrees with you, but because agreement is no longer required. Authority does not need consensus to function. This is the moment where you must decide how you will carry what is being restored. Will you lead from humility or from hurt? Will you steward influence with gratitude or grievance? Will you allow vindication to soften you or harden you? These questions matter because how you answer them determines not whether the calling is activated, but how far it will go. You are stepping into a season where your assignment is no longer questioned, but confirmed, where your voice carries weight because it was tested, where your presence commands respect because it was refined. And the same God who defended your character is now defending your calling, not to exalt you above others, but to position you where obedience can bless many. This is not the end of resistance, but it is the end of disqualification. You are no longer fighting to be seen. You are being entrusted to be effective, and as vindication of calling unfolds, remember this: you were never preserved for revenge. You were preserved for impact, and the impact ahead will make the waiting make sense. As your calling is being vindicated, and your influence begins to realign with God's original intent, the purpose of everything you endured starts to come into sharper focus. This is where many think the story ends: character-proven calling, restored doors reopened, but heaven reveals that this is only the beginning. There is a deeper dimension unfolding now, one that transforms vindication from a personal victory into a collective awakening. This is where your testimony becomes more than a story. It becomes a force. What God is doing in this phase is not merely clearing your name or restoring your position. He is consecrating your experience. He is taking what you lived through and assigning it weight, meaning, and reach beyond you. Because the most powerful vindication is not when people admit they were wrong, it is when others are strengthened because you remained faithful. This is the vindication of testimony, and it is the dimension most believers never fully step into, not because it is withheld, but because it requires surrender at a deeper level. You see, testimony is not about retelling pain for attention or rehearsing injustice for validation. True testimony is revelation wrapped in experience. It is truth that has been tested, refined, and proven in real life. And this is why the enemy fought so hard to silence you, not just to stop your calling, but to prevent your story from being told. Because a vindicated testimony does something terrifying to darkness. It exposes lies while restoring hope. Scripture reveals this pattern clearly in the life of Job. Job's suffering was not hidden. His accusations were public. His friends judged him openly and harshly, convinced that his pain must be proof of guilt. Yet when God vindicated Job, he did not simply restore what was lost, he reframed the narrative. Job's story became evidence that righteousness can endure misunderstanding, that faith can survive silence, and that God's justice operates beyond human perception. But notice something crucial: Job's restoration was released after he prayed for those who wronged him. That detail is not incidental, it is instructional. Vindication reached its fullest expression not when Job was proven right, but when he chose mercy over bitterness. His testimony was sealed not by retaliation, but by intercession. This is where many stop short. They want restoration without release, influence without forgiveness, testimony without transformation. But heaven operates differently. Your story is being prepared to carry authority not because of what you survived alone, but because of how you responded. The accusations didn't destroy you. The delay didn't harden you. The isolation didn't strip you of faith. And now the very thing that once caused you pain is becoming the source of someone else's deliverance. This is why God waited. This is why he didn't allow vindication to come prematurely. Because a testimony spoken too soon carries wounds. A testimony released in season carries healing. You must understand this clearly. Your vindication is not just for you. It is for everyone watching, those who lost faith in justice, those who questioned God's fairness, those who are enduring false accusations silently right now. When God vindicates you publicly, he is restoring credibility to truth itself. He is reminding the weary that obedience still matters and that faithfulness is never wasted. This is why how you steward this moment matters so deeply. Vindication gives you a voice, but the testimony determines how that voice is used. You can use it to accuse or you can use it to illuminate. You can use it to shame or you can use it to strengthen. Heaven is inviting you to choose wisely because the reach of your testimony depends on the posture of your heart. There is also a spiritual dimension here that cannot be ignored. Vindication does not end warfare, it escalates it. The enemy understands that a vindicated believer with a testimony is far more dangerous than one still fighting accusations, so he shifts tactics. Where he once attacked your reputation, he now targets your faith. Where he once whispered lies about you, he now whispers lies to you, suggesting that vindication won't last, that peace is temporary, that restoration can still be stolen. This is why Scripture reminds us that our battle is not against flesh and blood. What you experienced was never just interpersonal conflict. It was spiritual resistance manifesting through people, systems, and circumstances. And now that truth has begun to surface, the enemy's last attempt is to keep you bound internally to what has already been broken externally. This is where authority must be exercised. Not emotional reaction, but spiritual declaration. You are not called to relive the accusations. You are called to rebuke them. You are not meant to carry shame once truth has spoken. You are meant to renounce it. Words matter here because agreement matters. What you agree with determines what has permission to stay. When you speak truth out loud, when you declare freedom, reject shame, and affirm God's verdict, you are not performing ritual. You are enforcing heaven's decision in the natural realm. This is why Scripture says that life and death are in the power of the tongue. Silence had a season. Declaration now has authority, but authority must be exercised with wisdom. Vindication does not mean everything will look dramatic or public in the way you imagined. Sometimes the confirmation comes quietly, a conversation that shifts a message that brings closure, a sudden peace that replaces months of turmoil. Do not underestimate these signs. Peace itself can be evidence that the battle has ended. Clarity can be confirmation. Rest can be restoration. And when vindication becomes visible, how you respond will determine what comes next. This moment is not testing whether God is faithful. It is revealing whether you are ready. If you respond with grace, influence will increase. If you respond with humility, responsibility will expand. If you respond with love, your testimony will reach places your platform never could. This is why practical obedience matters now more than ever. Forgiveness is not symbolic, it is strategic. Releasing those who wronged you is not excusing behavior. It is breaking cycles. You forgive because freedom is more valuable than vindication alone. You forgive because bitterness would contaminate testimony. You forgive because God's justice does not require your resentment to function. Silence also becomes obedience in this season. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of trust. You do not need to explain yourself to everyone who misunderstood you. You do not need to correct every narrative. God is speaking on your behalf, and his voice carries more authority than yours ever could. Your restraint now is not weakness, it is maturity. As you move forward, consecrating your testimony becomes essential. Ask God how he wants your story to be used. Some testimonies are shared publicly, others are shared privately, some are spoken, others are lived. There is no single format, only obedience. When God directs how your story is told, it becomes effective rather than performative. Guard your heart closely during this time. Vindication can tempt pride just as easily as accusation invites shame. Check your motives often. Ask yourself whether you desire vindication for God's glory or personal validation. This honesty keeps you aligned. And alignment keeps your testimony powerful. Prepare for restoration because vindication often unlocks opportunity. What was withheld begins to return. What was stalled begins to move. What was broken begins to rebuild. Readiness honors the gift. Strengthen your systems. Increase your capacity. Steward what God releases so that increase does not overwhelm you. And do not miss this final profound truth as you sow into the vindication of others, your own vindication deepens. Defend someone who is being slandered. Pray for someone under attack. Intercede where accusation tries to dominate. When you become an agent of justice rather than a consumer of it, heaven entrusts you with more. Document what you are learning. Write it down. Remember it. One day someone will need the clarity you gained in the dark. Your testimony is still being written, and its final chapters will carry more weight than its opening pages. You are not defined by what was said about you. You are defined by what God declared over you, and his verdict is final. Vindicated, approved, restored. Not for revenge, but for revelation. Your story will stand as proof that truth endures, justice prevails, and faithfulness is always rewarded in its time. This is not the end of your journey. It is the turning point where your life begins to speak louder than your defense ever could. And as you walk forward, remember this: heaven didn't just clear your name, it empowered your voice. And through your testimony, many will find the courage to trust God again. And now, as everything you've heard settles into your spirit, this is where the journey comes full circle, not with noise, not with vindictive triumph, but with quiet authority and settled confidence. What began as confusion has been revealed as calling. What felt like accusation has been exposed as preparation. And what seemed like delay has been unveiled as divine timing. This is not the end of the process. It is the sealing of it. You are stepping into a moment where vindication no longer needs to be chased or defended. It stands on its own because God stands behind it. The truth no longer needs explanation, and your peace no longer depends on human approval. Heaven has spoken, and what heaven establishes cannot be overturned by opinions, assumptions, or past narratives. This is the reward of endurance, clarity without chaos, restoration without striving, and authority without arrogance. As vindication manifests, remember that how you carry it will determine how long it lasts. Grace must remain your posture. Humility must remain your anchor. What God has restored to you, your name, your credibility, your calling, your voice has been entrusted to you for stewardship, not display. Let your life speak where words once failed. Let consistency preach louder than declarations. Let love be the evidence that convinces even those who doubted you. You may notice that not everyone will apologize and not every misunderstanding will be revisited. That is not failure. That is freedom. Vindication does not require closure from people when peace has already been secured in God. Some chapters end without conversation because they no longer need explanation. Trust that what matters most has already been resolved. Now is the time to walk forward without looking over your shoulder. Release the need to rehash what God has healed. Release the urge to prove what God has already confirmed. You are not returning to who you were before the storm. You are emerging as someone stronger, clearer, and more grounded in truth. Carry that with gratitude. And as you go, remember this: your vindication was never just about you. It was about restoring faith in justice, hope in obedience, and confidence in God's faithfulness. Others will find courage in your story. Others will endure because you endured. Others will trust again because you did not quit. So walk in truth, walk in grace, walk without fear. Your vindication is not approaching, it is here. And whether whispered in peace or seen in public, the truth will stand. Heaven has guaranteed it.